New York City is bleeding. Right now. An 85-mile-long tunnel, the longest in the world, is cracked deep beneath the earth, and it is hemorrhaging 35 million gallons of water every single day. This is not a forecast, not a future problem. This is a wound that has been open for decades, and the city's $2 billion gamble to fix it just collapsed. The water that 8 million people drink, cook with, and depend on for their survival is being held together by infrastructure that is actively failing. And the leak is just the beginning. It's an invisible catastrophe happening under their feet. So let us know in the comments what you think the biggest silent threat to your own city's water supply is. It helps us understand what stories matter most. Look, a huge number of people who watch these deep dives, who value this kind of investigation, aren't subscribed. If you think this story, and others like it, absolutely need to be told, then hit that subscribe button right now. Don't wait. It is the single most important thing you can do to keep this channel alive and fighting the algorithm. It's an emergency for independent channels like this. Now, let's begin. The Delaware Aqueduct was an engineering triumph of the World War II era. Dug by hand, blasted through bedrock, constructed by men they called sandhogs, working in crushing darkness 600 feet beneath the Hudson River. When it opened in 1945, it was a monument to the city's ambition, designed to carry half of the daily water supply from the pristine Catskill Mountains into the 5 boroughs. It was built to last forever. It did not. As early as 1990, engineers discovered the first signs of failure. Catastrophic leaks were identified in 2 key locations, Newburgh and Woolworthing. Water, under immense pressure, was escaping through fractures in the concrete lining, flooding basements, creating sinkholes, and wasting enough water every day to supply a small city. For decades, the problem was managed, monitored, studied, a slow bleed that was always on tomorrow's to-do list. Then, tomorrow arrived. In 2010, the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, finally announced a plan. A massive, breathtakingly complex, $2 billion repair job. The solution was audacious. They would drill a brand new 2.5-mile bypass tunnel deep under the Hudson River, a completely new segment of aqueduct to replace the failing section. The final step required shutting down the entire Delaware Aqueduct, cutting off 50% of the city's water. For 8 straight months to connect the new tunnel to the old. The shutdown was scheduled for November 2024. The city prepared for life on half rations. Water conservation campaigns ramped up. Emergency protocols were put in place. Then, a historic drought warning forced them to pause. The city couldn't risk turning off the tap when its reservoirs were already strained. It was a prudent delay, a temporary setback. Then, in May of 2025, the real disaster struck. The DEP announced the entire repair contract had collapsed. The contractor walked away. The 8-month shutdown was officially off. The connection of the life-saving bypass tunnel was pushed indefinitely to sometime after 2027. The world's longest tunnel is still bleeding. And the $2 billion solution is sitting on a shelf, disconnected, waiting for a new plan that does not exist. This single failure should be enough to keep city officials awake at night. But what they are now discovering is that the slow bleed from the aqueduct is just the most visible symptom of a much deeper sickness. An illness that starts not in the tunnels under the ground, but in the water itself. New York City's water has a nickname, the champagne of drinking water, a reputation earned over a century. The entire system was built on a revolutionary idea. Instead of filtering water like every other major city, New York would make the source so clean it wouldn't need it. The city bought up huge swaths of land in the Catskill and Delaware watersheds, entire forests and valleys west of the Hudson, creating a multi-billion-dollar natural filtration plant. This pristine source water accounts for 90% of the city's supply. This strategy is so successful that the city operates under a special waiver from the federal government, a filtration avoidance determination. It's a deal. As long as New York can prove its source water is nearly perfect, it gets to avoid building a filtration plant that would cost tens of billions to construct and billions more to run. Every 10 years, the city has to renegotiate this waiver. In April 2026, the The new DEP commissioner, Lisa F. Garcia, began the formal process to renew it again, backed by a white paper promising a future of continued purity. But you can't drink a promise. And the purity is fading. Does your town or city rely on infrastructure from the 19th or 20th century, built for a world that no longer exists? Let us know in the comments below. The oldest part of New York's water network is the Croton system. First opened in 1842, it's a smaller, separate supply that provides about 10% of the city's water, mostly to the Bronx and parts of Manhattan. Unlike the Catskill and Delaware systems, the Croton water is filtered, but filtration can't stop the problem that's slowly killing it. Salt. For decades, millions of tons of road salt have been spread across the highways and streets of Westchester and Putnam counties every winter. That salt doesn't just disappear. It dissolves, seeps into the soil, and flows into the streams and rivers that feed the New Croton Reservoir. A DEP report released in March 2025 delivered the verdict. Since 1987, chloride levels in the Croton system have tripled. The champagne of drinking water is slowly turning into a brine. The trend line is unambiguous. Former DEP Commissioner Rohit T. Agarwala sounded the alarm just before he left office, and the data backs him up. If the current trend continues, the New Croton Reservoir will exceed the state's maximum allowable chloride levels for drinking water by the year 2108. That isn't a distant theoretical problem. That's a deadline. A date on the calendar when the city may have to abandon its oldest water source entirely, not because of a drought or a leak, but because a century of winter safety has poisoned it from the inside out. The city is facing the slow motion loss of 10% of its supply, a ticking salt clock that engineering can't reverse. But the real danger isn't the water that's too salty to drink. It's the water that everyone believes is perfectly safe. The 90% that comes from the pristine Catskills. The water that wins taste tests. The water that doesn't get filtered. Because there's a chemical secret in every glass. New York City's water is corrosive. According to the city's own 2025 water quality report, the water has an average Langelier saturation index, or LSI, of negative 2.13. That is not a neutral number. Any LSI below zero means the water is chemically aggressive. It is actively seeking to dissolve the materials it comes in contact with. In a brand new pipe, this isn't a problem. But New York isn't a brand new city. Under the streets, the city's massive water mains are mostly cast iron, strong and stable. The problem isn't the city's pipes, it's yours. The danger lies in the final 50 feet of the journey. The small pipe, called a service line, that connects the city's main to your building. And for hundreds of thousands of homes, that service line is made of lead. If you know someone living in an older city, maybe a family member in a pre-war apartment, share this video. And hitting the like button helps get this warning out to more people who urgently need to see it. It makes a difference. Before 1961, lead was the standard material for these connections. It was durable, flexible, and easy for plumbers to work with. It was also a potent neurotoxin. New York City has a legacy of this poison buried just beneath the pavement, and the city's naturally corrosive water acts like a solvent, constantly, quietly, eating away at the inside of those pipes. Leaching lead directly into the water moments before it reaches a kitchen sink or a baby's bottle. The scale of the threat is staggering. A report by the Natural Resources Defense Council, led by senior attorney Joan Leary Matthews, laid it bare. An estimated 1 in 5 New Yorkers, that's 1.84 million people across more than 900,000 households, live in buildings with known or possible lead service lines. It is an epidemic hidden in plain sight. In some neighborhoods, the risk is astronomical. In Port Richmond, Staten Island, 67% of homes have these dangerous pipes. Compare that to Fresh Meadows, Queens, with the lowest rate at 20.56%, and even there, 1 in 5 homes is still a gamble. For years, the city's response was muted. Then, in 2019, Local Law 65 forced the DEP to create a public, transparent map of lead service lines. Suddenly, the problem had addresses. It had names. It was no longer an abstract risk. It was your home, or your neighbor's. The city treats the water with orthophosphates, a food-grade chemical that coats the inside of pipes to reduce corrosion. It's a shield, but it's not a perfect shield, and the 2025 water quality tests prove it. The EPA's action level for lead is 15 micrograms per liter. It's not a health standard, it's a trigger for requiring utility action. Any single sample above that level is a red flag. In 2025, out of 326 residential taps tested by the city, 16 of them breached that line. 16 red flags. One sample hit 155 micrograms per liter, more than 10 times the action level. That wasn't a statistical anomaly. That was a cup of poison drawn from a New York City tap. Joan Leary Matthews put it bluntly, generations of children have not and will not achieve their full potential because they have been poisoned with lead. We need real solutions, not excuses. The administration of Mayor Zohran Mamdani is responding. In October of 2025, the DEP used $72 million in federal funds to accelerate a free lead service line replacement program for eligible homes in Queens and the Bronx. It's a critical step. But there are hundreds of thousands of these lines. Replacing them all will take decades and billions of dollars. And every day until then, the city's celebrated water continues its work. Dissolving a little more of the past and delivering it to the present, the illusion of the filtration-free system is that the water is pure. It is not. It is simply from a well-protected source. But the forests of the Catskills can't stop everything. The 2025 Water Quality Report revealed another disturbing fact, this one about what's living in the water before it gets treated. The Kensico Reservoir is a critical choke point in the system. It's where water from both the Catskill and Delaware systems mixes before making its final journey into the city. It's the last stop for the unfiltered supply. Raw water samples are taken from this reservoir constantly, and in 2025, 38 out of 53 of those samples tested positive for Giardia. Giardia is a microscopic parasite that causes severe gastrointestinal illness. It comes from one place: animal fecal waste. It washes into the streams and rivers from wildlife, gets concentrated in the reservoir, and arrives at the gates of the city. Over 71% of the raw water samples contained a pathogen that could sicken millions. The city's defense against this is absolute and non-negotiable. Just before the water enters the city's distribution mains, it is blasted with a massive dose of ultraviolet light, then treated with chlorine. The UV light scrambles the DNA of the parasites, neutralizing them. The chlorine kills off any remaining bacteria. It is an effective, powerful, 1-2 punch. It works, but it reveals the truth behind the champagne myth. The city isn't delivering pristine mountain spring water. It is delivering water that requires a constant, high-tech chemical war to be waged upon it just moments before you turn on your faucet. And that war has consequences. It creates chemical exhaust. When chlorine is added to water that contains naturally occurring organic matter, bits of leaves, soil, and everything else that makes up a raw water source, it creates a group of chemicals called disinfection byproducts. The two main culprits are total trihalomethanes, or TTHMs, and haloacetic acids, known as HAAs. Both are linked to long-term health risks, including cancer, and their levels are climbing. The EPA has strict legal limits. For TTHMs, the limit is 80 micrograms per liter. For HAAs, it's 60. Compliance is based on a running average across the system. In 2025, New York City's Titham average was 52. The HAA average was 47. Those numbers are uncomfortably close to the legal ceiling. And while the average might be in compliance, individual samples have already spiked above the legal limit. This is the deadly paradox of the system. The more pathogens like Giardia that appear in the raw water, the more chlorine the DEP must use to keep the water safe to drink today. But the more chlorine they use, the more disinfection byproducts they create, raising the long-term health risks for everyone who drinks it tomorrow. They are walking a chemical tightrope, caught between the threat of immediate infection and the threat of chronic disease. I know. This is the second time I'm asking. But it's important. A shocking number of viewers get this far and still haven't subscribed. If you believe in this mission, if you found value in this, please take 1 second and hit that subscribe button. You become part of the reason we can keep making these. it makes a bigger difference than you can possibly imagine. The system is under assault from every direction. An aqueduct that's bleeding out, a secondary water source that's turning to brine, a primary water source that's chemically corrosive, activating a legacy of lead poison hidden in the city's own walls, a pathogen load that requires an escalating chemical war, creating a toxic exhaust that is building up in the pipes. Any one of these problems would be a generational challenge for a city. New York is facing all of them at once. And hanging over it all is the problem we started with, the postponed catastrophe. The broken aqueduct. The city's plan to survive the 8-month shutdown of the Delaware Aqueduct was never just about conservation. It relied heavily on pumping the Croton system at its maximum capacity to make up for the 50% shortfall. But what if the Croton system is compromised? What if a severe drought occurs during the shutdown, straining the already reduced supply even further? This is precisely what happened in November 2024 when the initial shutdown was paused. The risk of a compound crisis, a shutdown overlapping with a drought, was too high. The collapse of the repair contract in May 2025 was more than just a logistical failure. It was an admission that the city's Plan A had no Plan B. The statement from former Commissioner Agarwala was telling, "A new contract must take every contingency into account to ensure we meet our critical responsibility." They were forced back to the drawing board because their original plan was too fragile. It had no margin for error in a world that is nothing but error. So now, New York City is living on borrowed time. It is operating with a critical artery that could fail more catastrophically at any moment. It is relying 100% on an infrastructure system with zero redundancy for half of its water. The bypass tunnel, the $2 billion lifeboat, is finished but sitting in the dark, unable to be connected until at least 2028, and likely later. Every single day, the city is rolling the dice, praying that the old cracked tunnel holds on just a little bit longer. Lisa Garcia, the new DEP commissioner, faces an almost impossible task. She must simultaneously convince state and federal regulators, like Amanda Lefton at the NICEDEC, that the city's unfiltered water is still pure enough to earn another 10-year waiver, while internally grappling with the evidence that the system is deteriorating from every angle. Her public statements project confidence. New York City's water system is one of the best examples in the world, she said in April 2026. This report shows that our approach continues to keep New Yorkers safe. But safety is relative. Safe from Giardia today might mean exposure to lead and HAAs for the next 20 years. The very definition of safe water in New York City is becoming a series of complex, uncomfortable trade-offs. The story of New York's water was once a simple narrative of triumph, of brilliant engineering and pristine nature working in harmony. A story of a city that bent the wild to its will and created the champagne of drinking water. That story is over. The new story is one of triage, a story of fighting a multi-front war against the decay of the 20th century systems it inherited. It's a battle against leaking tunnels, corrosive chemistry, invasive pathogens, and the toxic legacy of lead pipes. The city is spending hundreds of millions on pipe replacements and billions on tunnel repairs, not to innovate, but simply to keep the existing aging machine from falling apart completely. The water that arrives at the edge of the city is a modern marvel, but that marvel is being fed into a crumbling, deteriorating delivery network that contaminates it, wastes it, and threatens its very existence. The city built an empire on a foundation of pristine water. The question now is what happens when that foundation begins to turn to poison. The clock is running on the 35 million